Good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. Now that you guys know I'm standing between you and lunch, I'll try to make this as quickly as possible. I'm really excited to be here with you. I grew up right here in Hell's Kitchen. Now, the Hell's Kitchen from the 70s and 80s, not this Hell's Kitchen, the one where it was really bad. And I grew up with a single mother on welfare and food stamps, and education is the reason I get to stand here in front of you. And so I'm very passionate about education, and I'm very passionate about what we can do with education. So I'm waiting for my slides to pop up there. There we go. Okay, so, all right, kind of halfway there. They're not all there. It's always fun when you have these kinds of, oh, there. All right, so anyway, so I want to start with this idea that where I'm coming from. I grew up here in New York, but I went to college in upstate New York, and I went to ASU. And I am the education evangelist at Google, and I've been in that role for the past 11 years. I helped launch Google Apps for Education at ASU, part of the team that helped launch Google Apps into K-12, and part of the team that helped launch Chromebooks in education. So I've been a witness to, or been part of the disruption that's happening in education for the last decade, and I want to share a couple of new thoughts. And education's been under a lot of pressure lately. And a lot of that has to do with the disruptions that's happening in this space. Some of the things that you'll hear from people is that education is broken, or we can't fix education, it's just helpless. I don't buy that narrative, because I wouldn't be standing here in front of you if it wasn't for education. And also, I think it puts the emphasis on the wrong thing. I don't necessarily think that education is broken. What I think is happening is that the world has changed, and that we no longer live in this world, and that we can't prepare students for jobs of the past any longer. The education system served this economy very well, but it's not going to do it for the economy that we currently face. I believe what we do now is we live in this world. There will be people who talk about how we need to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US, but the truth is only about 15% of those jobs have been lost to trade. The rest have been lost to automation. In the next 2 decades, most metropolitan areas will lose about 50% of their jobs to things like, in jobs like retail, sales, finance, administrative support, those types of roles. And so it becomes even more important to focus on what we can do with cloud computing, because at the end of the day, it's cloud computing that's having the hugest impact in this space. This is impacting every industry. Every organization is in a race for, or should be in a race for, transforming their digital platforms to what they're doing with the cloud. And this is happening in every single organization. So what we need to do is make sure that we're focused on how we can transform our organizations, how we use the cloud to help transform what's happening in the education space. Now, it's in the shadow of this generation, it's in the shadow of the cloud that this generation comes to us, Generation Z. These are the students who are now starting to think about what college is going to look like for them, what higher education is going to look like. There are roughly 74 million of them as of 2015. They're born around the year 2000, and they think about things from a different perspective. There are 3 things. There's a lot to know about this generation, but there's 3 specific things that I want you to focus on. Number 1 is that they are truly the first digital generation. Second, they are the generation that is worried about a lot of things, and top of mind is what the future of work will look like. And third, they understand the importance of education. They just want to change a couple of things. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. First, this is the generation that was born not knowing what the world looked like before Google. They're growing up with the instinct to look things up quickly whenever they have a question. They're the first true digital native generation, because most of them, the majority of them, spend at least an hour online every day, and half of them spend close to 10 hours a day. So they're born, raised on the internet, using cloud computing, cloud services. Now, what's important about understanding this is that they have information coming at them at such a rate of speed right? There's 3.8 million Google searches that get searched every minute. 400 hours of video gets uploaded on YouTube every minute. And this is a generation that's communicating through text messages and pictures. And so they are focused on things like Snapchat, where 1.8 million snaps get uploaded on Snapchat every minute. And in that same minute, 46,000 photos get uploaded on Instagram. So they are truly the first digital generation. They don't know what the world looked like before technology, before digital tools that they have at their fingertips. Second, they're worried about work. 60% of them are worried about what the future of work will look like. They're concerned about what the life is that they'll have because they're watching the world that they're growing up in. So for example, we grew up with this idea that if you work hard and you get your education and you're dedicated and loyal in a company, you can succeed, you can advance. And they're growing up thinking that this isn't true. They watch their parents struggle with work, looking for work, losing their jobs even though they were dedicated in their organizations. They're growing up with their siblings, going off to college and coming back with huge college debt and no job just to move back into their bedrooms. So it's no wonder that 70% of them want to work for themselves in the future. And even if they do work for a company, they want to have work that's meaningful because they understand that 70% of Americans are disengaged with their work. They want to have a different impact on the world. They're also worried about a lot of things in the world. This is the 9/11 generation. They don't know the world before 9/11. They just know the post-9/11 world. And so they're growing up fearing a lot of things. They grew up with this, with the US never being in peace. We've been in a war in one country or another their entire life. They're growing up in the shadow of global terrorism and domestic terrorism with gun violence on high school campuses, on elementary schools, on college campuses. They're growing up with this idea of global change and climate change and how we haven't done anything about it. And today at 3 o'clock, it's only going to get worse. So they're growing up fearing all these things, and no wonder they don't go outside very much. They stay at home and stay online. So they're growing up with these things, and the good news is that they believe that higher education is important. 81% of them believe that a college degree is important to what they want to do in the future. Now, 80% of them are worried about what the cost of college is going to be, but 2/3 of them believe that the benefits of college outweigh those costs. They just want to change a couple of things. For example, 80% of them want you to integrate internships into their college experience. And they don't want to wait till they're seniors in college. They want to do this as early as possible because experiences are important to this generation. So they want to make sure they have those experiences. More than 70% of them want to be able to design their own course of study. And not necessarily all from scratch, but at least do some of it because they're used to designing and customizing lots of different things. So they believe higher education is important. They just want to be able to have more of a say in what higher education is going to look like. Now, what do we do with this information? How do we prepare for this generation? We know that education is important. We know that we can no longer prepare kids for jobs that don't exist. We've been talking about the skills of the future for a very long time. We even call them 21st century skills, right? Collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking, the ability to learn. These are the things that we've been talking about for so long, we call them 21st century skills, even though we're 17 years into the 21st century. The 21st century is already here. So I think what we need to do is think about those skills from a different perspective. For example, one of the questions that we still ask students today is, what do you want to be when you grow up? That question doesn't make any sense. We don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be. And if we understand this generation and we really get to know this generation, what we'll realize is that they care more about problems. And so what we should be asking students is, what problem do you want to solve? What problem spins in your head? Because then we can ask them follow-up questions like, what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to solve this problem? What do you need to learn to solve this problem? It's a picture of our Google Science Fair winners from a couple years ago, and the girl there in the middle, Anne, not your typical science student, that's how she was described, but there was a problem she wanted to solve. She had a friend who lived in the Philippines, and her friend didn't have electricity. So she was upset she couldn't read at night, couldn't do homework at night. So she went and invented a flashlight that's powered by the heat of the human hand. And she was 15 years old when she did it. The same is true with how they solve these problems. They want ownership in how they solve these problems. We know that this generation isn't motivated by financial gains or advancements in a company, that they want to focus on these problems that we've been talking to them about their entire lives. For example, this is another one of our Google Science Fair winners, Brittany. She won the grand prize for the research that she did in solving and in making cancer research more effective. And she was 17 years old when she did this. But the fascinating thing about how she did this was that she literally picked up a college how to code textbook, how to code 101 textbook, and taught herself how to program. And after many, many attempts and trials and error, she was able to create a neural network that replicated what the human brain looks like. And after like 7.6 million trials, was able to create an effective system for detecting harmful cancer cells. So the ability, the capacity that these kids have is amazing them if we give them the opportunity to open them up and try things the way they want to do things. And what we want to really do is make sure that we are focused on helping them build the skills that they need. Because we know we no longer live in the world where it's about what you know, it's what you do with what you know. This generation is growing up with technology at their fingertips. Information has no value, it's a commodity. It's what you do with that information that makes sense. So what we want to do is create higher education environments where they can thrive, where they can solve the problems that they're interested in solving. This is a picture of my 2-year-old daughter. And back in December, we got one of those Google Homes. And we brought this thing home and set it up. And my wife and I were messing with it and talking to her about, or just talking to the device. And I don't want to say because it'll set off your phones, but okay, whatever. What's the temperature outside? Okay. What's the weather like in New York? My daughter's watching all this, and she comes and stands between us. Not participating, just observing. And she looks at this thing, and as you can tell by her cape, she's addicted to Spider-Man. And she says, okay, play the Spider-Man song. And no response. She says again, okay, play the Spider-Man song. No response. She looks up at me and says, Papi, Google's broken. In just a couple of seconds, she realized how this thing works. What's going to happen when Google isn't broken for her anymore? When it can recognize what her question is based on her age, where if she asks a question like, why is the sun hot? It'll give her a 4-year-old answer. Or, better yet, using a good inquiry-based model, it'll ask her questions to follow up on so that she can follow her curiosity. This is who we're preparing our higher education for. How do we create organizations that run effectively and efficiently, but also create the environment to build lifelong learners, because that's what we need in the future. Thank you guys very much.